Got dreams of being a professional podcaster, but have no idea what you're doing?
This is impossible.
That's about to change.
A new kind of school.
Welcome to the Pod School Podcast.
Hello, welcome to the show. So, you're cheesed off at your podcast host, hey, and you want to find someone new. Is that a bad idea? Well, sometimes. So choosing a new podcast host when you already have an existing show is not a totally bad thing. It is also not a massive monumental punish to shift over. But there are a few things to consider. I would always advise doing your research when you start out and you are beginning your show. That doesn't mean that you need to go with a platform that's super expensive or high end. You can go with a platform like Libsyn, which starts out at $5 a month, and then you can grow with them as your podcast grows. Or if you think, you know what, I really do want to give this a red hot crack, then look around at the different podcast hosts and choose one that has features that you think you might want to use in the future. Obviously, if funds are an issue, then starting small is something you'll want to do. But if you choose a host that is cheap or free, just make sure that they are podcasting focused and that they are built to grow with you as your show grows. Because what you don't want to do is start out with a free platform just because it's free and you haven't really done much due diligence in terms of their features and things, and then realize, oh, this is kind of crappy and I want to shift over, because while the process isn't horrific, it's always good to stay with one platform if you can. Having said that, if you do need to shift your show over, it's important to remember that your podcast host is the link between you and the podcast directories. So the podcast directories are things like Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast host, you upload all of your MP3 files to them and they generate what's called an RSS feed, and that is essentially, it just looks like a URL to you or I, so you don't need to know much about the tech behind the scenes, although I do have another episode that focuses on RSS feeds if you want to check that out. Just scroll back in the feed. When you originally start your show, you basically need to go around to all of the directories and submit that RSS feed, which is just a process of copying and pasting the link, so that those directories know when you have released a brand new episode. Basically, that is the link between the two places that says to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, yoo-hoo, there's a new bit of audio here. Can you please display it in your podcast app? So it stands to reason when you move to a new podcast host, you are going to get a new RSS feed and you are going to need to resubmit that feed to all of the podcast directories. Not a gigantic issue, but I always find, having a website and a podcast and all sorts of things, that even when I have tried to do things like this or redirect pages on my website, you'll always find there's one or two broken links you forgot about. And they'll usually pop up about 3 months later when you go to click on something on a blog post that you posted and you realize, it doesn't work anymore. Forgot about this thing. So there is always the chance that you will overlook something if you're going from one podcast host to another. The other thing you're going to need to do is when you set up a new account with a new podcast host, you will need to import all of your old shows from the old host and redirect your feed from the old host to the new host. The great thing is that most podcast hosts have really detailed support documents around how to transfer over from specific platforms. So make sure you do your research and look into how you actually do it on each of those platforms. Some platforms will actually transfer things over for you, so they will actually do a lot of the work behind the scenes. You still have to resubmit to the directories and things, but in terms of importing your feed, they'll do that for you. So there is a process with every single platform. They will be able to tell you how to transfer across. So it might be worth, if you are starting to think about going somewhere new, really investigating where has the best features for you and then checking their support documents or contacting their support to say, hey, what's the process to transfer over? And then seeing if you can be bothered or not. The other thing to note is that you will be starting from scratch with your analytics. So that can be a real turn off for people, because people like to log into a dashboard, particularly when they're starting out and their numbers aren't so big, and see the numbers adding up incrementally. And you will basically be starting from zero when you move to a new podcast host. Of course, that does not mean that you have no listeners. That basically means that your stats on the new podcast host are just just being measured from the day that you move over. So what you do in your old host is you will download your stats from your time with them. You'll usually export them into a CSV file, and then you can take them with you as a little CSV file package that is proof that you did have downloads somewhere else. So when you are talking about how many downloads you have on your show, you can still refer to old downloads that existed on another host because you've got proof there. But if you're somebody who likes to log into a dashboard and see things go up incrementally, it can be a bit of a blow when you open up the dashboard and you see 0. I have transferred my podcast across between podcast hosts before and had quite a few downloads on my old show, and it was, I had to keep opening my CSV file to remind myself that no, I did have a successful show. That's right. Anyway, it didn't take long to build back up again, which was good. So my advice really would be, when you are starting out, really think carefully about the host that you are going to go with. Do your research, look at their features. Think about you, not right now, but you 5 years from now. Obviously, financial considerations are going to be a big thing, but that doesn't mean that you have to go with a podcast host that isn't good. And you can start out with a platform like Libsyn, who are one of the biggest podcast hosts in the world, and then just grow with them. Because ideally, it would be great if you could stay with one podcast host for the life of your show. But if you need to shift over for whatever reason, it's not the end of the world. It's just not like a super fun, happy time experience. I mean, it's not hell, but it's also not chocolate cake. It's just somewhere in between. I hope that's helped you think a bit about whether or not you should stay put or move to a new podcast host. As with anything, research just can really put you in a good position when you're starting out anything. Don't jump blindly in, or in 6 months' time, you might look around and go, oh, this is crap and nobody told me. Well, did they not tell you, or did you not do your research? That is the question. If you want a little help, speaking of research, with your podcast, then come and check out my online podcasting course, PodSchool. You can find all the details of what is involved at podschool.com.au, where I take you through everything from the very beginning of coming up with your idea all the way through to turning your show into a business, if that is what you want to do. I would love to have you part of the course and help you create a professional sounding show, because my great dream with this course is to rid the world of shit podcasts, because there are enough of them. All right, that's enough from me. I will see you next week. And until then, happy podcasting.
That's all for today.